Hello, welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Pick and Pay, and another week of January where we look at some New Year's resolutions. So last week I discussed some of the things I want to try and do in 2020. Go to new estates, go to regions I haven't spent so much time of, experiment with different wine, just be a little bit more adventurous, and in doing so celebrate all that is good and great about South African wine, and that's all very much on my agenda for the year ahead. But for a lot of people, the new year means resolutions that see them changing their lifestyle a bit, and perhaps more than just swapping some Sauvignon Blanc for some Chenin Blanc in terms of their weekly wine purchasing. Most people it's about getting fitter, getting a bit healthier, eating a little better, drinking a little better. And so to that end, I dropped into Pick and Pay and came away with 4 bottles of wine that in different ways will address those particular requests. A couple of alcohol-free wines or thereabouts, a wine with not much alcohol and pretty low in kilojoules, and then a wine that is from one of the estates that is a flagship when it comes to the making of organic wine. And I think that's going to be increasingly important for winemakers, not just in South Africa, but right around the world, as we look at how wine is made and what impact that wine is having on the environment, both immediately around it and beyond. So the 4 wines I've got kick off with something from the house of J.C. Roux. Now, it is an immediately recognizable name and brand in South Africa. I think for many people, myself amongst them, the first encounters with J.C. Roux were not long after school, in my case going to 21st birthday parties, where this was often the bubbles of choice to be popped for students who generally were more interested in the volume and the consumption than the niceties and the subtleties of the bubbles being poured. And often it was a little bit sweet, it was a little on the more inexpensive side, and as a result, J.C. Roux doesn't get quite as much respect as I think it perhaps should. If you look at the upper end of what they make, the Scintillas, their flagship, for instance, is an excellent Cup Classique, and they've been making bubbles for, since the 1700s, so we're going back a good few centuries. And what they've come to now is this. It's the Le Domaine, which you might have had before. It's a combination of Sauvignon Blanc and Muscadel, and Muscadel giving the sweetness to that Sauvignon Blanc base. So it's certainly unusual in terms of the normal MCC we get in South Africa, which is usually a Chardonnay, a Pinot Noir, or a combination thereof. But people are playing around a little, and in this combination, they've played around with not the makeup of the grape, but the makeup of the alcohol, because they've made it, they then de-alcoholized it, so they've removed the alcohol from it and left just a tiny fraction, about 0.5%, so it's certainly not alcohol-free, but there's very, very little alcohol in it, and as a result, there's also a little less by way of calorie count. So that's the makeup of it, that's how it's put together, but what does it actually taste like? So there we go, it's certainly got the fizz and the puff of smoke that all good bubbles should have. Whoa. Now that, as you can see while the bubbles clear, is incredibly pale. I've got a brother-in-law, Fergal, who lives in Belfast in Northern Ireland. He's about that colour, almost completely white with a very, very, very tiny hint of pink. That pink, of course, magnified any time he spends more than 3 minutes in the sun. So very pale colour. Interesting nose. You definitely pick up the fizz on it. What will it deliver? I'm quite pleasantly surprised by that. It doesn't have the little kick and fizz of alcohol as opposed to the bubbles that you'll get from an alcoholic drink, from a normal bottle of Cup Classique or bottle of wine. But it's not nearly as sweet as I was expecting, given especially the presence of the Muscadel in there. In fact, it's quite tart at the end, reasonably crisp. And actually quite refreshing. As I've said before, when we've tried the almost zero range from Van Leeuwen, the non-alcoholic wine is not my first choice, but if for some reason I had to be drinking, if I'd, for instance, suddenly fallen pregnant, which I concede is unlikely, but if that were to be the case, then this is something I could happily toast with and not cringe at it. And nice and chilled. If you are not drinking, then not a bad idea. It obviously doesn't apply if you are not drinking for religious or ethical or spiritual reasons. It still has that 0.5%. It has been de-alcoholized, but at just that 0.5%, it's a very fractional percentage of alcohol in there, to the extent that you don't actually need a license to sell this. Anything under 1% alcohol, you don't need that license. And so that's why you probably won't find this on the shelves in the wine section. You'll find it elsewhere with other non-alcoholic products, probably near the grape juice. So really more of a slightly tart, fizzy grape juice than any real sense of Cup Classique. But as an alternative, I think J.C. Leroux have given you one you can certainly work with. Well, from wine with almost no alcohol to wine that I think probably would appeal to more people in terms of where they see themselves in January. The thought of completely alcohol-free wine is maybe too much to bear, but something that's lighter both in alcohol and in kilojoules might do the trick. Throw in the fact that we're in summer, and here is your extra light Sauvignon Blanc from Robertson Winery. And as they make very clear, extra light, low in alcohol and kilojoules. And just in case you didn't read the low in alcohol and kilojoules, they make sure that you know that it is low in alcohol and kilojoules. They are determined to make sure that you know that this is low in alcohol and kilojoules. And that it may well be, but is it low in taste and flavour? Because to me that's always the challenge when you're taking a product that hasn't really changed a massive amount over a very long period of time. You'll find most wine in South Africa sitting somewhere between about 12 and 15% alcohol. You're suddenly dropping it down to, in this case, what do we have here, 9%. What impact is that having on the flavour? What impact is that having on the mouthfeel that you get from your Sauvignon Blanc? Is it still going to have the depth of flavour that you'd like, or is it going to have a kind of watered down feel to it? Only one way to find out. I mentioned Van Leeuwen a little earlier with their almost zero range. Robertson as a whole, I find, is being really adventurous with what it's doing, whether it's Lausanne putting together their Carmenere, whether it's the Van Leeuwen guys who bring out something new and different every few months, Robertson Winery who produce a massive amount of wine, and given the volumes that they make it at and the price point, I think still deliver really good value for money and very decent quality. And in this case, giving us a wine that is low on both alcohol and on kilojoules, if that hadn't been mentioned already. Very fruity nose. It certainly is light. It's got probably an unripe green melon feel to it. There's a crispness to it. It doesn't have the depth and breadth of one of the bigger, more powerful Sauvignon Blancs, but I think on a hot day, a couple of glasses of this, you'll be absolutely fine. And given the lack of kilojoules, it'll keep your dietitian happy and probably your bank manager as well, because this is 55 rand a bottle or thereabouts. Even in January, I suspect you can probably manage that. Then to a wine I've been meaning to try for a while. This has been on the market for just under a year, and it's from Leopard's Leap, which falls under the Greater Lamotte Empire, the second farm. I was chatting to Hein Kuchlenberg, the man behind the brand and behind Lamotte, on the golf course last year, and he was discussing this and how he felt it was an area of the wine market that was only going to grow. And it was just after news had broken that Van Leeuwen are bringing out their almost zero range, and this is their Natura de-alcoholized classic red. And I've been meaning to try it for a while. I finally got around to it. So I haven't tasted it as yet. It's a Cab Sav Cinsault blend, so I know what I'd expect from a regular Cab Sav Cinsault blend. It'd be the nice, big, rich Cabernet Sauvignon with that slightly lighter, slightly more playful Cinsault. But what's going to happen once they've taken the alcohol out? Because as with the J.C. Leroux that we saw a little while ago, so this was made and then de-alcoholized, and again down to about 0.5% or thereabouts. So again, as with that J.C. Leroux, technically you don't need a license to sell it. It falls under the 1% barrier. But again, if you don't drink for spiritual reasons, for religious reasons, it's not something you can drink because there is still just that little bit of alcohol there. But if you want a red wine for January that doesn't have too much alcohol in it, this will be it. But as with the two previous ones, it's all well and good creating the product, but you've still got to want to drink it, don't you? There's a bit of Kirsch cherry liqueur and a bit of marzipan on that. Ooh. It's a very distinctive nose. It doesn't taste exactly like wine, but it's a reasonable facsimile. And again, as with our previous wine, it's one that does your January budget pretty good as well. It's about 65 rand a bottle or thereabouts. So if you're in an almost but not quite dry January and you like your red wine, it's not quite the real thing, but it's a reasonable alternative. Right, and after the ungodly act of drinking alcohol-free wine, onto something that does have alcohol, plenty of it, 13%, so kind of where you'd expect most South African red wine to be, or thereabouts. So if it's not alcohol-free or alcohol light, why am I suggesting this? Well, a lot of articles that I've read already in 2020 have spoken about wine estates, winemakers, increasing their environmental awareness, ensuring they are more sustainable, that they're using organic wine processes, that the terroir from which the wine comes is being looked after as well as possible, and that the impact on the environment is minimal, from carbon footprint to the use of pesticides to ensuring that you recycle as much as possible. There are loads of different elements, and that is becoming a bigger and bigger focus both for consumer and for producer, and that is a very good thing because we want a better environment for our wine to be produced in and which we can consume, feeling that the wine we are drinking is not damaging or hurting the environment. And in terms of the guys who do it right in South Africa, Reyneke are right up at the top. They've been a benchmark producer for some time now in terms of their organic processes. If you've ever been to Reyneke, you'll discover that they not only don't use pesticides, they've got an army of ducks who eat snails and other pests, and they look after the entire process from start to finish as naturally as they possibly can. And yet they've still won loads of awards, they've still got great accolades, much acclaim, because they're not impacting negatively on their final product by embracing the methods that they do. So just like somebody like Jonathan at Avondale, who's another great supporter of the sustainable winemaking process, so the Reyneke team really do produce wine that ticks every possible box in terms of being fantastic to drink as well as being really good for the planet. And this one here is a Cabernet Sauvignon Shiraz blend. It's mostly Shiraz, about 85% Shiraz, the rest is Cab Sauv. And it's got a far more pronounced wine nose than our three predecessors there. It's a 2018, we're in 2020, so technically it's now a 2-year-old red wine, and it's drinking pretty well for something that's still relatively young and relatively inexpensive. This is about 85 rand a bottle, so again, it's not something that's too expensive. A little more time wouldn't hurt it, but it's certainly more than drinkable now. The spice of that Shiraz is the dominant, as you'd expect, given the percentage. But that Cabernet Sauvignon just raising its head above the ramparts and making itself felt. So what's really good about it is that it's very nice wine and it is organic. And in the minds of some people, there's a disconnect there. Or if you're making organic wine, it's not going to be as nice. There's going to be something missing. And yet people like Reyneke, look at the guys at Waverley Hills out near Tulbach. There are a number of South African wine estates who are doing more and more in terms of ensuring that their wine practices are sustainable, and so the glass of wine that you're drinking, you can drink in good conscience, and this is another one of them. So there you go, whether it's alcohol-free wine, wine with not too much alcohol, or somewhere in the middle that's low on alcohol and kilojoules, there's a great selection, great range of options you can have a look at as you get through January, and then once you get to January, you can throw that all out the window and get back to drinking your regular wine come February. But it's a mark, I think, of where we are as a South African wine industry, that there are these options, that people are being catered for in terms of their different tastes and their different requests, And so now when you head out to Pick and Pay and you browse the shelves, whether it is your regular full strength wine, or you're looking at something that's a lot lighter, or you're going for something that's very clearly organic, there is a lot of wine to choose from. And that is just another bonus of living in such a wonderful wine producing country. Enjoy your wine drinking. We'll see you next week.